Okay. All right, so let's continue. Let's continue 134. Unless, of course, other questions, other thoughts. I'm always happy to hear you. Okay, let's continue. Fine. So let's continue 134. Speaking of the 3 of the 5 levels of the souls, the 3 levels that continue to be here in this world and interact with this world. Does anyone want to read?
I'll read. Go ahead.
Go ahead, Margot.
Okay. In order that each neshama or ruach or nefesh in the human body should be able to comprehend them in its mind and to fulfill them as far as they can be fulfilled in act, speech, and thought, thereby clothing itself with all its 10 attributes in these 3 garments.
Right.
The contraction of the divine will in the 613 mitzvot of the Torah is meant for the soul as enclosed in the physical body and a physical world.
Right. Let's add one more, but I think this is connected to what was just said. One more paragraph. Go ahead.
Okay. This is why the Torah has been compared to water. Just as water descends from a higher place to a lower place, so has the Torah descended from its place of glory, which is the will and wisdom of the blessed. For the Torah and the Holy One, blessed be he, are one, and no thought can apprehend him at all. Thence it was progressively descended through hidden steps, step after step with the evolution of the worlds, until it clothed itself in physical things and in matters of this world, which comprise virtually all of the commandments of the Torah and their laws.
Right, stop there for a second and then we'll speak about, we'll continue with Rabbi Schnauz's commentary. But so I just want to evoke, in order to better understand what was just said, I want to evoke one of the great parables of Rabbi Hillel of Parich, who was a great Hasidic Jew some 250 years ago, who would give the analogy of that melody that a person, so there was once a person who walked in the streets and he hears this most beautiful melody and he's completely captivated by it. And he feels like he's transported to a different time, to a different place altogether through this melody. Then the melody ends and he continues on with life. But he doesn't continue on as the same person. He's forever changed by this melody. And now he has this obsession to find this melody again. And he searches the entire world for that melody. It's a melody that made him feel like nothing he's ever felt before. And his whole life, he tries to find this melody and find this melody and find this melody. And he does all sorts of things to find this melody, travels to all sorts of places to find this melody. And he's still not finding this melody. And the analogy is the analogy of the soul, according to Rabbi Hillel of Parich. Up there in heaven, we heard this wonderful melody, this heavenly, sublime melody, a melody that made us feel us, and that made us feel as heavenly as possible. And then our soul was thrown down to this world to live a very materialistic, physical life. And in this world, we have this deep yearning. That soul doesn't rest and it wants to find that melody. So it goes and it travels the world to find the melody. It goes shopping to find this melody. It goes it falls in all sorts of addictions sometimes to find this melody. And we are not satisfied. Nowhere we go, nothing we do helps us find this melody until we can connect with the Nefesh, Ruach, and Neshama as mentioned here, to God himself in the Torah, to God himself in the mitzvahs. When we connect then to God, then all of a sudden our soul feels, oh, I finally find this melody. Something in me has clicked, and I can once again bask in that heavenly feeling that I had up there in heaven. And in a way, that's what Tanya is saying right here, that we were put into this world. This world, unfortunately, has many, many layers of separation between the physical world and the spiritual world, or ourselves and our bodies and our souls, or maybe humanity and God himself. And God says, but do not worry. I'll put that melody, I'll insert it into very specific things, in the Torah, into mitzvahs, like he says, or into this world altogether. But you'll have to find it. You'll have to go and exercise and toil until until we connect once again. And that's the idea here of the Torah being compared to water. God says, don't worry, that flow will continue. But in order to nourish that soul, you can't just go shopping. You can't just go to Hawaii and think that you'll find it there. No, go into my Torah, go to my words, go to my directions, and there you'll quench your soul, the thirst of your soul. There you'll find my waters. That's the big idea. Just to go a little deeper into this, and I want to hear your thoughts, but just to go deeper into this, that it's interesting to note that, yes, there is that fountain that the Torah is of water that can quench the soul. But I'm going to go a little deeper and say that everyone has their part of the fountain that satisfies his or her soul the most. It's almost like that fountain has different flavors. I don't know if there's something like that in this world, where you go to a spring and you find different flavors depending on where you stand or depending on what you know, how deep you go into that fountain. But it's almost like that fountain of God has different flavors. And everyone, in a way, not only can quench their soul by drinking from that fountain, but in a way they can also actualize, first understand, and then actualize their purpose by swimming into that fountain and trying to find the flavor that best fits them, that is best tailored to them. Because in a way, we can all quench our souls by drinking from God's fountain, but there'll be a time in which we'll have to find our part of the fountain, our unique connection. Not just be satisfied with the general connection. Our soul now is studying Torah and is doing a mitzvah, but what's our purpose? What's our unique mission in this world? And for that, we'll have to find that flavor, or that, if it's a question of flavors, but we'll have to find that, maybe that stream, however you want to call it, in God's fountain, in order to truly actualize our soul. You know, the Talmud has a whole list. I think in the Tractate of Chagiga, I think so. There's a whole list of the Talmudic sages and their favorite mitzvah, or what they were most strict with. And it's not that they didn't perform the other mitzvahs, but they felt that there was one mitzvah that spoke to them the most because it was most tailored to their soul and to the calling of their soul in this world. So as we swim in that fountain and we quench our souls by drinking it, we'll have to find our flavor, our stream. Sometimes, you know, people are more attracted to the mitzvah of tzedakah. Other people are more attracted to the mitzvah of prayer, which is completely different. Other people are more attracted to the mitzvah of mezuzah, or whatever it may be. And everyone has their own stream within that fountain. And it's important to remember that, because we'll never be fully satisfied. Our soul will never be fully fully accomplished until we find that stream that belongs really just to us.
And may I add to that?
Yes, please, Ronnie.
So as I'm hearing you say that, and we each have our own, it's like we each have an instrument, and to learn to play the instrument so that we can come together in community and play as an orchestra.
Right. Beautifully said. Yeah, I love that analogy too. That's right. Exactly. Yeah. So the idea that, why am I saying this? Because the idea, and I know it's an idea that maybe is prevalent among certain circles in Judaism, the idea that all you have to do is go and study Torah, maybe even all day long, and then you'll quench your soul, is an incomplete idea. Because fine, you can learn the art of music, but to use your analogy, Ronnie, but until you find your instrument, you won't be fulfilling your personal individual mission.
But I think the very important thing is that I now am a master of my instrument, that we come together as a community, and we need the people who give tzedakah. We need the people who do the prayer. We need all kinds of things, and to work together in a common cause.
Right.
To make beautiful music together. Beautifully
said. Yes, absolutely. That's correct. And I'll add to that. There's a Hasidic also saying in Hayom Yom, but that says that if the guy, to again go back to the analogy, if the guy who's giving tzedakah thinks that he has to pray, and the guy who prays thinks that he has to give tzedakah, then we have a mishmash that creates a terrible, I would say, create maybe melodies that are off tune. So we have to stick to really what our mission is. Absolutely. To use another analogy, it's like an army. If the pilot tries to be a foot soldier, and the foot soldier tries to be the chef, and the chef tries to be the clerk, then you won't have an army. But the pilot has to be the pilot, the chef has to be the chef, the foot soldier has to be the foot soldier. That's correct. Yeah. Okay, well said.
So everybody just has one sort of mission, sort of? I mean, can you have more than one?
So that's the thing. So that's the multi-layered fountain here, that we all drink from the same fountain, and our souls can only be satisfied from that same fountain. But as we're drinking from that fountain, to dig deeper, we'll have to find that stream, that part of the fountain, or that flavor, or whatever it may be, that speaks to us the most, and that enables us to actualize our soul's mission the most. So we first have to count it. I would say
go back to Ronnie's example. I don't think you could play just one instrument. You can't just pray or you just can't give charity. You have to be multitask. You have to serve. You have to wash dishes. You have to cook. You can't just drink one flavor. Right.
No, it's true. You have. It's just like, but to go back to Ronnie's example, in order to play in a symphony, you need to know music. You need to know how to read notes. You need to have a good ear for music. There's a lot of things you first need to know. Then you have to find your instrument, and you still have to dabble and involve yourself in the other parts of music. But still, there is a path that only you can walk. There is a note that only you can play. You should play. It doesn't mean that you shouldn't play the other notes, but sometimes in a symphony, there's a note that only the violin plays, or only the flute plays, or whatever it may be. And it doesn't take away the fact that you still have to be involved in the entire symphony. But there is a path that's unique to you. There's a role that in history, I know it sounds grandiose, but I'm not trying to be grandiose. There's a role in history that only you can play. God is waiting for us. The whole world was created in order for everyone to play that note, to be able to, enter that role and actualize it. Yeah.
And if we all play together and practice together, we'll win a Grammy. And hopefully we can do that.
That's right. More than a Grammy. Yeah.
More than a Grammy.
Yeah. 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 Very good. All right. Yeah. Okay. So let's continue on here at the bottom of page 134. Now, speaking about this fountain of God that quenches the soul, Rabbi Stans continues on here. In its loftier incarnation. Does anyone want to continue to read? Anyone?
I'll go ahead if nobody else wants to. Okay, I don't mind. In its loftier incarnation, the Torah, being the Chachma of God, is like himself, inherently unattainable and incomprehensible. But it does not remain at this level. The entire point of a Torah is that the divine wisdom, while remaining inherently incomprehensible, should progressively be re-articulated level after level until it is rendered in a formula to which every human being can in some way relate. We cannot comprehend these formulas fully because they relate to the divine reality rather than to ours, but we can relate to certain aspects of their bottom line, to their translation into a law and philosophy for physical life.
Right. So it reminds me of Rabbi Steinsaltz would say that, Rabbi Steinsaltz himself was a teacher of mathematics. I think at the age of 22 and 23. And he would teach mathematics to his students, but he would teach them mostly calculations that can be solved. But he would also make a point to teach them calculations that cannot be solved. There are mathematical calculations that have no solution yet. Why? To teach his students not just that mathematics has calculations that cannot be solved, but also to teach his students that mathematics is like life. A lot of the calculations can be solved, but you'll have to know that there are things that are not solvable, and you got to live with them. And mathematics lives with the mathematics, even with these calculations, and it doesn't come to throw the whole, all of the theories of mathematics down the drain. You have calculations that cannot be solved, just like life. And in a way, I think this is the secret of our interaction with God and with his Torah. That on the one hand, we have to try and understand God. In fact, it's one of the commandments. It's one of the mitzvahs of the Torah. Da'et Elokei Avicha. Know your God. So we have to connect our minds with God's mind and study the Torah. Now then, as we do so, we also have to recognize that there will be parts of God that we'll never be able to understand. And that God remains infinite and we remain finite. And that the finite won't forever be able to grasp the infinite. There'll be parts of God that we'll understand, just like mathematics, and part of God that we won't be able to understand. That doesn't mean that we should stop that interaction. Quite the opposite. Maybe it should challenge us to try and understand more and more and more. And maybe we'll understand it after trying to understand more and more. Maybe we won't. But it's this exercise that can become very, very redeeming, yet on the other hand also very frustrating. But that frustration can also lead to a more engaged and more unified connection with God.
Rabbi, is there a difference between understanding God and accepting God?
That's a good question. I think that I'm going to put it this way. Many people think that once I've tried to understand God, that's when I have to accept God. And I can't understand him anymore. That's when I have to accept God or accept his ruling, so to speak. I think it's the opposite. I think you first have to accept God. Then you'll be able to understand him better. I would use the analogy of parents. As a kid, I had many rules to follow. Now, whether I understood those rules or not, I accepted the fact that I'll forever be the child of my parents. I can't go and pick another family, another set of parents. It's impossible. That acceptance, I think, enabled my understanding to come from a place of love and of connection that is of unity. A connection that is truly untouchable. And I think that's the idea. Yes, we believe in accepting God, but the acceptance of God. I asked Racheli Frankel, it's coming to mind. I remember that, Racheli Frankel, the mother of Naftali Frankel, who was kidnapped and murdered by terrorists in the summer of 2014 in Israel. I asked her, she's a devout woman of faith. And I asked her if her faith was hurt because of this murder. I mean, 16-year-old child being killed, murdered like this. Did she have problems of faith? And she said, no, not at all. She said, my faith was always unquestioned, or I never questioned my faith. And if anything, it bolstered my faith. And then she used the analogy, that's because my faith is like an anchor. That anchor is always there. Whether I want it or not, I'm anchored. And yes, I could suffer all sorts of waves, but that anchor is anchored, and it's not anchored by me. It was anchored by God. God anchors me. So it's in his control. If he wants to detach that anchor, then fine, maybe then I'll lose my faith. But the point is that in Judaism, I think we first and foremost accept the idea that God is an inseparable part of us. We can't just go and pick other parents, like I said. And it's almost like Rabbi Levi Yitzchak of Berditchev would say, that so powerfully, and I think that encapsulates the Jewish approach in the best way possible. In a simplistic way, he would say, you can be for God and you can be against God, but you can't be without God. And
yeah, like that's good.
yeah,
That's good.
but that's true. I mean, other religions, you know, being against God is, oh no, no, what are you going to challenge God? Just surrender. Islam means to surrender. But in Judaism, there's no problem being against God. But the idea is that you can't be without God, because God is your parent again, or much more than that. It's an inseparable part of you. So the acceptance of God comes before the understanding of God. And as I try and understand God, sometimes I'll find things that I just can't understand, and maybe I'll have to go against. But that's fine, because it doesn't challenge my anchor. Yeah.
How can you be against God? Well, like what's an example of being against God?
So being against God, I think we have that example on a daily in our daily routine. Each time we pray, we're a little bit against God. Part of prayer is saying, God, you're not doing things right. This person is sick. It's not right. I'm against you. I'm against your ruling here. You ruled that he should be sick today. I'm sorry. I think you're wrong. I think prayer is being against God in many, many ways. And not just, versus people that are sick, but sometimes also, versus the first prayer in Amidah, the first request really in Amidah is that we ask God for wisdom. And sometimes we say to God, look, you didn't allocate me enough wisdom. I want more. So I'm going against you. Now, only a fool can ask for that sometimes, but
Right.
it's that beauty, that the beauty of the admission that, okay, I'm not wise enough. God, give me more wisdom. And in a way, that's going against God too. But saying there are many ways we go against God in prayer. And that's fine. Again, it's not like by going against God, I'm negating God. By going against God, quite the opposite. I'm actually connecting to God even more.
Questioning. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, think of, again, our children. I don't know if, again, that parent-child analogy it's such a good analogy when it comes to God, because I think God is much more than that. God is a partner. But to try and understand this better, when our children accept everything we do, I don't know if I would want my children to accept everything that every ruling, everything that I give them or I don't give them. I want my children to interact with me. And sometimes those interactions are tough ones, but that's what deepens the relationship. Like if our children follow us naively and it's goody-goodies all the time, then the relationship suffers. It's a nice relationship, it's a peaceful relationship, but it's not a deep relationship. What creates the depth in relationship is particularly the opposing forces sometimes. It's like digging. You can only dig a hole in the ground and then eventually maybe reach some water if you fight the ground. If you accept the ground for what it is, then you might have a relationship with the ground. You're standing on it and you look at it from time to time, but you can't really reveal the treasures that are within it. So I think it's the same idea, really the same idea. Sometimes our going against God deepens our relationship with God.
And God expects us to do that. And if we don't do it, God's saying, you're not doing your job. I'll have to give you something to fight me about.
Oh.
Right.
And he does a good job at it.
Sometimes too good of a job at it.
Right.
That's right. It's true. But he's certainly looking for that. There's no doubt. And we ought to look for that too.
But we
You know,
have to be thinking that when we are making those decisions of what's important in whether it's raising children or making friends or whatever it might be, there are certain things that we know we can't accept and they need to understand that. Or I'm giving an example, like when I was raising my children and I was very young and I saw this boy across the street that I got to know, and I really liked his personality, the way he was. And I asked his mother, you know, what do I need to learn? And she said, decide what you're going to say no to. And there shouldn't be many things that you say no to. But when you say no, it's no. And you never change it. And that way you grow into an understanding. Well, I think that could be true in this situation also. There are certain things that are important to me that I really want to understand. I don't try to understand it all.
Right, right.
Yeah.
Right. No, very well said. That's right. Absolutely. And those no's not only create boundaries, but in a way also create the framework, they create the flow of the relationship, right? Just like a stream of water, it can't really flow if it doesn't have these boundaries.
Mhm.
So it really enhances the relationship and makes sure that the flow is healthy. That's right. But I will say this, you know, the Kotzker Rebbe, Rabbi Menachem Mendel Morgenstern, of some 250 years ago, maybe even a little more, he asked the question of why is it that when the snake sinned at the beginning of times, when he convinced Adam and Eve to drink from the forbidden tree, why is it that his punishment was that his feet should be cut off and that livelihood should be present in front of him all the time? That's what God told him. That your feet will be cut off and you'll be eating from the dust of the world your whole life, which means that you won't have to work like all other animals, and like the human species too, have to each and every day. We have to work for our livelihood. The snake didn't have to work for his livelihood. That was his punishment. But that's not a punishment. That's the greatest reward. If you don't have to work for your livelihood, imagine you don't have to work for your livelihood. Imagine I wanted to work, wow, vacation mode all the time. I don't have to work for my livelihood. Money's growing on trees. And that's the punishment that was given to the snake. That's not a punishment. And Menachem Mendel Morgenstern would reply very powerfully. He would say, no, that's the ultimate punishment. Because what God was telling the snake is, snake, I'll give you whatever you want. Just leave me alone. I don't want a relationship with you.
Mhm.
That's the worst punishment. And in a way, when God says, no, I'm not going to give you now, he's saying, I want a relationship with you. That's what he's saying. So ask, and maybe I'll give you. Let's speak about it. Let's develop our relationship. And then there's a connection. And then there's a flow. Again, then that stream of water truly flows. But when it's like, okay, I'll give you whatever you want. Just take whatever you want. You want to have money growing on trees like the snake? Take it. You want to have good health? Take it. You want to have no problems whatsoever? Take it. But at some point, when God says, take it, take it, take it, take it, he might be telling us, I don't want to have anything to do with you. And that's the worst punishment of all.
Wow.
And that's why I'm saying these no's and these boundaries and these restrictions and these things that we cannot understand sometimes are actually God's way of telling us, I want you. And I want a relationship with you. And let's dig and dig and dig, and we'll unravel some beautiful treasures within this interaction. Yeah. It's almost like the image of the ark in the Holy of Holies, says that God would speak to Moses, mibein shena keruvim, from between the keruvim, those two little cherubims, that's what they called. They were on top of the ark that served as the cover of the ark, right? They were two little baby-faced angels carved on top of the ark, and it served as the cover of the ark as mentioned. And God said to Moses, I will speak to you from between those two angels, baby-faced angels. And the commentaries point out, why did God have to speak to him from in between those two angels? Why not speak to him just directly from another vessel of the temple? Why from in between those two faces? And God was trying to convey the message that he resides in the in-between of people. If I can create a connection with someone else, then God will come and dwell, a real connection, right? A good, healthy connection. Someone else, God come and reside in between that I've just created. And it's true not just with connections with others, but it's true with our connection with God. When we turn to God and God turns to us, God is in the in-between. It's in right there, in the middle of us. If I live without God, or God lives without me, then there's really no presence of God, no voice of God speaking to me. There's no relationship. But when we each turn our faces and try to connect, try to interact, that's where God will be. That's really the big idea. Yeah.
I wanted to add something that I would think that would be how music is, why music is music, because there has to be spaces in between the notes.
Right.
Or language even. We just don't speak without it has to go together, the spaces and the notes or the spaces and the formation of the sound. Otherwise, just one straight sound is not going to make any sense.
No, very good. Very good. It's like Claude Debussy said, right? That music is silence between the notes.
Yep.
That's right. That's right. I believe that's why also God created breaths. Why do we breathe? And more importantly, why do we have to breathe between words? And the reason is because in a way, we have to be able to withdraw and say it's not just about me, but it's about what is being said to me too. It's about listening, about taking a breath and saying, okay, I said my words. What am I hearing in between the words? Is there anything that I have to connect to? Not just me trying to connect, but others trying to connect to me.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's what music is. That's right. The silence between the notes. And that's what divinity is, or the revelation of God is. When we create that, silence ourselves, and we say, you know what, God, I want to interact with you. It's not just about me and my life. I need you. I need you, or I don't need you, and let me tell you why. Going against you right now. But at least there's a relationship there. You can be for God, you can be against God, but you can't be without God.